Hello and welcome to another SonicLAB. I've got a big pile of keyboards around me today, but we're not looking at those. What we're looking at today is the Sipario Lab from Lab4Music, an Italian company who've made this little box here, which is essentially an intelligent standalone MIDI router. Sipario actually means curtain or something of the like. I think it means kind of show curtains, that sort of curtain that you get in front of a performance stage. And as such, it is very much designed for live use because it doesn't require a computer to operate. In fact, it has a colour touchscreen, a data entry knob for scrolling through. So if we go into our scenes here, we've got all these different setups up to, I think actually, how many scenes? 40 scenes. And each of these scenes can have up to 30 slots in it, which can be programmed for the specific MIDI routings. You've also got this nice big backlit button, which can at the moment be programmed to flip between programs in one direction or the other direction, not both, or it can be configured to do page turns as well, because obviously you might not want to go all the way down using this control. But it's actually got a colour touchscreen, so selecting, you can use your finger, or you can use, like I say, the button, or you can use the rotary encoder. There's also this little exit button, which is just for dipping in and out, because you edit the whole thing basically via the touchscreen, which is actually pretty cool. Let's take a look at the hardware though. I've got it hooked up to these keyboards here, and what I'm doing is we've got a USB B-type connection here. I should add, this thing is really nice and sturdy, lovely built. It doesn't feel like there's any push on this. You can, stab at this touchscreen with no problems at all. What we've got is a USB B-type connector, which is for power only. We've got an A-type connector, which is very interesting because it works in host mode, and that can either drive a MIDI keyboard, such as I've got an M-Audio Axiom Air 61 here, which is quite a fully featured MIDI controller keyboard. Although interestingly, I chose this one because it doesn't do splits and layers, because inside the Sipario, I keep mispronouncing that, you can actually set up different splits and layers on a per patch basis. So just to plug that in, it's really straightforward. If we come out wide, and all I'm going to do, this is plugged into the Axiom, I'm going to plug the USB in and it will power the unit, no problem. I found this worked with a number of things. It even worked with the BeatStep Pro, but it's better if you've got, say, an iPad charger or something which has got a decent bit of ampage coming in to power the entire device. And that's fine, but the only thing, it's quite unsophisticated. So quite often with USB devices, they might have multiple MIDI ports, some for the controller layer, some for the keyboard layer, or some for an additional MIDI output, which you can access generally via a host computer. The Sipario isn't quite so clever. It just addresses one, and I guess maybe that's the first one in the list, so that might be something to watch out for, and maybe something that they could fix in a future firmware update. Maybe it could actually understand how many ports were available and just say 1, 2, 3, or however many there are. So looking at this here now, if I just play the keyboard, in the lower half I'm playing the Sub 37, and that's the MIDI coming via the USB out of MIDI output and into the MIDI in of the Sub 37, and in the top end I'm playing the Minilog and a load of effects. This is all going through the Behringer XR, which is something I use quite a lot. So nice. So I could just show you how that's set up. If we come in close to the screen, I'm going to press the rotary encoder, which opens the edit mode. Now, each of these little memory slots has up to 8 zones, which is actually really impressive. So each zone allows you to set up the MIDI routing like this. Right, so first of all, we can activate or deactivate or solo the MIDI zone. We can set which channel in we want it to be. Current firmware only allows you to choose from channel 1 and 2, but I have to say that I contacted Sipario and said, oh, it'd be great if it did more, and they've just literally released a firmware update which allows you to filter the input based on up to 16 MIDI channels. So you can use it for, say, if you had a sequencer with lots of different MIDI channel outputs, you can route it all over the place. This is just working on channel 1. We can set the volume of the zone, we can set the key high and key low, we can set the MIDI routing, so that's the output channel, and take the MIDI in from obviously in 1, in 2, or USB, which we're using in this case, and again send the output to output 1, output 2, or USB. There's also another page of parameters which allows you to map even more. So we can say whether we want the sustain to send out any of these controller values. So it could just be sustain for sustain, sustain to sustain, or it can map to different controllers. So you might be able to use it to switch on and off a Leslie effect or something like that. We've also got, I'll just come back out there. We've also got the rhythm, which is actually MIDI clocks. And what rhythm RTM is actually, that sends out a MIDI command when you recall that particular patch. So if we take a look at the screen here, what it will do is allow us to send out a start command, continue command, or a stop command based on whatever the, oops, we won't save that, based on whatever each one of these. So I could have start, continue, stop, or start, stop, continue embedded in each one of these presets. And that could be quite useful because I might have a drum machine on one MIDI port and maybe a sequencer on another. So I could start and stop them individually depending on how I wanted to set it up. We've got the ability to affect the velocity curves, which are user programmable inside. We can transpose the particular zone. We can also, and I'll show you this a plus or minus, we can also set a velocity level in at which point the zone becomes active. So you can set dynamic velocity layers as well. We can send program changes on a specific channel which might be separate to our main output channel, bank, MSB, LSB, so you can pretty much get anywhere. But there's also another feature which allows you to map incoming MIDI controllers to outgoing MIDI controllers in both positive and negative. But anyway, I won't save that. So this is obviously one patch. Now I'm just going to hit another one, and what that's done is sent a program change to the sub 37 and to the Korg. So in this case, I've got this kind of sync sound. And if I hit it harder, it brings in, I think it's 72, it sets the MIDI log off. So this is only triggered when I reach a specific velocity. Again, I'm only using 2 layers here. Remember, I've got 8 I could use per patch, so it's pretty powerful. But I've also set something else up. On the sub 37, I'm taking the MIDI out of that and coming back into the Sipario. And I'm routing that as a split. So in this instance, I've got... I'm splitting the keyboard here, so I've got MIDI log on the top, sub 37 on the bottom, as well as my routing here. Let's come in and change to another patch, which again will send out different program changes. Bottom here, I've got this rather mad sound on the sub 37. And this rather floaty koto type sound on the top. Again, I've got just a basic split here, but there's a couple of things. I like this. If I'm bringing the mod wheel, I really like what that does to the sub 37 sound. However, I don't like what it does to the top sound. So what I can do is a number of things. I'm going to come back into edit mode. We'll go into P3, which is the controller routing. I'm just going to pass that through. I'm not going to do any filtering. Come back to M2, which is my mini log layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the input. Now I can dial that in via the rotary encoder, or what I could do is just move the mod wheel like that and it's done it, and then I'm not going to route it out, so effectively it's become filtered. So now when I play, the mod wheel is not passing through to the mini log, so job's good, and it means I didn't have to reprogram the sound because I might have used that somewhere else. Very nice. I mean, as well as filtering the controllers in there, we can also reroute and remap them. I'll just show you what I mean. So here, we're back on this page here. Obviously, we can take an input controller, which could be anything up to 0 to 127, but I can map that to one of these other controllers in both positive and negative. So I could map C4 to C50 or whatever, but then I could keep going up until I get this little I in front. And that means what happens is positive value comes in here, negative value goes out there. So it's actually quite a useful mapping, and we've got 5 slots for each of the 8 zones. Another thing I noticed here is, to be honest, I think the Korg is, the mini log, the sub is too loud. So I'm just gonna bring that down a bit to maybe 50%, that feels better. So you can see all I've done is I've just basically dialed in. I can take it right down or take it up a bit. Obviously you'll need that to be your device to recognise 7, otherwise, you know, it's not going to work. But now, so now I can basically just save that, and that'll be one of my routings, and the job's good, you know, it works really nicely. So if I just come out again here, I'm going to come out, I'm not going to save that, I'll come out, I've got another patch that I set up here, and this is basically, it's like a nice 303 style thing again on the Sub 37. And this MIDI channel, this keyboard is actually transmitting on MIDI channel 1. I've also, if I come in, I can show you what I've actually done here. I've got MIDI channel 1, but on M2, I've got MIDI channel 2 routed to the Korg. So if I come out, I'll just basically reset the MIDI channel of the Axiom, enter. So now, this is now routing channelized directly through to the Minilog. So you can see there's a lot of potential here. I mean, this is just a keyboard that has one MIDI channel across its entire span. This doesn't do splits and layers, so this is very handy. So now what I could do is, actually I can play the keyboard here, and what's handy is it will trigger the sequencer inside the Sub 37, so I could play along. So you see what's going on here is, you know, I've actually got some quite complex routings going on. Again, no computer is involved here, and I'm not using all of the MIDI inputs. I could actually take another MIDI input from the Minilog and have splits on this keyboard as well if I wanted, up to 8, you know, I mean, it's a crazy amount of things. Now, there's a couple of things you should know. I think it's almost perfect. I mean, there are a few issues which it would be really nice to see fixed. Obviously, this run button, actually I thought it said run, but it says fun, which is kind of funny. Would be nice if this did some other things. Like I say, it could do page, it can go in that direction or that direction through the presets, but it can't say, for instance, I might only want to cycle around A, B and C. I can't set that range, or it'd be nice to be able to use that as a send a MIDI start command to run a sequencer or whatever. Those would be useful things, so I'd like to see this utilised a little bit more. I mean, another thing is, obviously, we've only got a pair of MIDI IOs here. Imagine if we had more. You know, if there was a bigger unit with maybe 4 MIDI IO, it'd be a really powerful system and a way of interfacing either all of your live keyboards, or if in the studio you can use it as well. And that brings up another interesting thing. You can, in fact, set the Sipario so that it goes in host mode. To do that, though, you can only use this USB port, which is a B type. So you need a flat to flat, so you need to plug flat in there to your computer. Then what happens is the Sipario will show up as a single MIDI port, and the routings that you've set up via the hardware will essentially come into the USB. So it doesn't just become like a regular MIDI interface with a bunch of ports on it. It might have been nice to see a mode where you could just today, can you be a 2-in, 2-out USB MIDI interface, you know, without all the filtering stuff. But all of these things can be fixed. As I said, you know, when I got in touch with the guys there and said, oh, it would be really useful if you could filter the input signal based on more than just 2 MIDI channels, because in the current release of firmware, it only will filter input channel 1, channel 2. Whereas, say, on my BeatStep Pro, it'll output up to 4 or 5 MIDI channels. And I was thinking, oh, it could be useful for my live setup where I fire off all the MIDI program changes to all of the devices, but I can also play via the BeatStep. They fixed that straight away. It was literally 24 hours. Anyway, let's get back to some of the more useful functions. Obviously, in this mode, I've been using this, like, for instance, it might be 3 different songs. And I might have all my songs listed here. In fact, if I come in and edit, I can edit that icon. So it could be any one of these icons, or I can edit text. I've got loads of text labels that I can choose from, and then I can just drop those in. So let's call that 2-step, and then it'll be called 2-step rather than A. But the other thing that I can do, if I come out a bit further, actually is one other thing. If I press and hold, I can copy that patch and I can paste it into that slot. So that's another neat, useful feature, very quick way of copying things. I'll come out another layer, and these would be known as scenes. You've got, I think it's 40 scenes. So you could have each scene being a live set, or you could have, for instance, each scene being a song, because if you press and hold, you can then edit at the set list level or the scene level. So I hit edit, I can change the title, but I also got the ability to send out up to 5 program changes across all of the ports on different MIDI channels. So I could basically, if I come out, when I hit this, it could send out up to 5 MIDI program changes, and then when I come into edit, this might be, you know, sections of a song where subtle things change rather than the whole thing. So you've got quite a lot of flexibility in how you want to set this up. So I know I've been sort of talking quite fast. I mean, there's not all that much to demonstrate with this, but I have to say it's actually really useful, and it's got me thinking, oh yeah, certainly for my live setup, it would be invaluable, because I could route things however I want and send all those program changes without having to have an iPad, without having to have a computer involved. And that's something that I think is quite powerful and something that you don't find many places. The downside is, obviously it's a small company, so you're not going to get that kind of economy of scale. The cost is 320 euros I've seen it for at Thomann, so it's going to around about 260, 270 quid, probably around the $300 mark when you can get it over there. But the bottom line is, it's actually a very useful little device, and the fact that you can control all of this stuff without the need for a computer is very, very useful. And certainly for me, maybe for live work, or if you wanted to use it into the studio and, like I say, hook it up to a host computer and route these keyboards how you want in and out of the host, also very handy. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. That was SonicLAB. That is the Lab4Music Sipario. I think I said that correctly. Don't forget, subscribe. See you next time.